You, of course, are listening to the MHA podcast. Why in the world would you play Isaiah McKenzie over your third-round pick, T. Higgins? Why? I like any quarterback that can make Will Fuller look good.
I love it. I think he's a top 20 receiver.
I mean, he is the Jamar Chase whisperer.
Oh, hell yes. Oh, my God.
You know, everybody loves Lamar Jackson.
Hated it.
I trust Derek Carr.
Come on. For real?
I know why you did. It's because you're crazy.
It's still the week and the games aren't even over yet. It's great. It's fantastic.
Fantastic.
It's fantastic.
Patrick Mahomes. Looks so good. Kyle Pitts was bad. Stank.
It's not my shebang. Justin Jefferson.
So good.
We could call him Russell Wilson if you want.
Ooh. Well done, sir. That is good stuff. All of those guys have more fantasy points than Tom Brady. I'm laughing, but I'm crying at the same time. It's terrible. Well, folks, the 2023 Mile High Affiliates fantasy football season is finally over, and we have crowned our new champion. Welcome to our championship edition of the MHA podcast. I'm Eric Lansing, along with Mikey Renault, and our new MHA champion, the Butterfingers. Of course, Todd Diamond is with us as well. Congratulations, TD, picking up that third championship. How are you feeling?
Feels good. Feels good. You know, 2013 was the last time I won it. 2018 was the last time I was in the title game. And, it feels good. Feels good to get that third championship just because of the fact of where I was at the beginning of the season, you know, week one, and then the 1-5 start, and, you know, wouldn't think I was there. But ultimately, I solved the Rubik's Cube. It is complete, fellas. It's complete.
The running joke on the show, the Rubik's Cube. He finished it. Well, there you go. We'll talk all about it, of course. We also have another special guest with us on the show, Joe Vaccarelli, who joins us on the show, the owner of Kilgore Trout, who was in the matchup with Todd. And Joe, thanks for coming on. Joe is absolutely thrilled to come back and relive this week 17 and, of course, how it all went down. How you doing, Joe?
Oh, I'm hanging in there. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we should have sent you like a muffin basket or something, or some good tequila, I think.
Whiskey would have been good, yeah.
Whiskey's your thing?
Yeah.
All right, cool. I'll send you some whiskey, Joe.
If you're winning.
You all get together and just have some alcohol and make it us all feel numb to the whole fantasy football year. Joe's been in the league since 2008, 16 seasons in the MHA. Time flies, doesn't it, Joe?
What? It's been that long?
It's been. I went and looked at it right before this podcast. 16 seasons.
Sense. I remember the first draft I was at in the newsroom at Metro State.
That's right.
With the same board you have every year.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's amazing.
Not too much turnover. It's pretty cool. Same guys every year.
Yeah, we've been able to keep some of these guys. Some of these guys have been here since the beginning, like myself and Mikey and Aaron and Alan Cook, who's still in the league. And we picked some people up from along the way from college. That's how I met Joe. Was back at MSU Denver, Metro State back then, and then a couple folks later on, and here we are 22 seasons later. It's unbelievable. So what's coming up on the show? Well, we'll recap this past championship matchup. We'll go in depth into this Butterfingers Kilgore Trout matchup. We'll have some MHA trivia. We'll also chat about Joe and his season, and if we have time at the end, we'll look at the top finishers from each position and kind of talk on it a little bit. So before we get into all of that, let's play some MHA trivia.
Time to play the game. Time to play the game.
All right. Joe, would you like to play with us, or do you want to watch Mikey and Todd go toe-to-toe?
Oh, I'm in.
Oh, he is in. All right. This isn't a super long MHA trivia. We'll kind of go... Well, I guess, do we want to do it kind of like, I don't know, Fantasy Feud where someone chimes in, or should we just go one by one? Let me see. Let me think. I should have thought about this beforehand. Let's just go through. We'll just go through. And since, Joe's unfortunately did not win the championship, we'll let him go first. But here, we'll do it. We'll do it this way. I'm going to tell you the question, and then we'll go through. We'll go Joe, Todd, and then Mikey. And then whoever ends up having the most after all said and done wins MHA trivia. So, what is the question? you may be asking. So we saw Jaguars tight end Evan Ingram reach 100 receptions this past weekend, joining 7 other tight ends that reached the century mark in that category. So fellas, you're going to tell me which other tight ends reached 100 receptions in a single season. And we'll let Joe go first.
I'll go with Tony Gonzalez.
Tony Gonzalez. Well done, sir. He picks up the first point. Tony Gonzalez did it with Kansas City back in 2004 with 102 receptions. All right, Todd, to you.
Antonio Gates.
Antonio Gates. No, I'm sorry. Sorry. Antonio Gates is not on the list. So sorry, Todd. Over to Mikey Renault.
I'm just still floored by the whole Evan Ingram thing. That has to be the quietest 100 receptions I've ever seen.
Kidding. I thought the same thing when that popped up on the screen. I'm with you on that.
I'll go with Travis Kelce.
Travis Kelce. In fact, he did it 3 times. Travis Kelce had 110 in 2022, 105 in 2020, and 103 in 2018. So Mikey picks up a point. 1 for Joe, 0 for Todd, 1 for Mikey. Back to Joe. Who else you got there?
Oof. I mean, those are the big 3 right there.
Definitely were. These other guys are pretty big names too, though.
Yeah. Did Rob Gronkowski do it?
He did not. I was surprised when I did not see his name come across there either. Back to you, Todd Diamond.
Jason Witten.
Jason Witten, the old Dallas Cowboys tight end. That is correct. Had 110 in 2012. So Todd picks up his first point. Over to Mikey for a chance to take the lead.
Yeah, that was a nice job by Todd.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Mark Andrews.
Mark Andrews. Very good, Miguel. He had 107 in 2021. Mikey takes the lead, picking up his second point. Back to Joe Vaccarelli.
Jeez, how many are left?
Let's see. 1 and 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nope, sorry. We have 3. You don't have the number 1 answer. You don't have the number 5, and you don't have number 7.
George Kittle?
George Kittle. That's a good guess, but unfortunately, I'm afraid not. George Kittle not on the list. Back to you, Todd.
Jimmy Graham.
Jimmy Graham. He was more of a touchdown scorer than a receptions guy, but not a bad guess. Over to you, Miguel.
I'm probably going to be wrong, but I don't want to waste time, so I'm just going to say Shannon Sharp.
Yeah, I thought maybe he'd be on that list too. He is not. Let's see. One of these guys, as we're going back to Joe, just here's some quick hints. We had a guy from 2018. He's actually the number 1 on here with 116 receptions. You had a gentleman in 2020 who had 107. And how about 2009? Does that help you at all, Joe?
Not really. I'll throw out Greg Olson.
Ooh, good guess. Unfortunately, not one of the answers. Back to you, Todd.
TJ Hawkinson.
TJ Hawkinson. No, I'm sorry. Mikey, if you get this, I'm calling the game. Because that would give you 3. And we don't want to spend too much time on MHA trivia. I thought you guys would roll through this.
I'm just trying to think of somebody that's like, he said 2019.
2018, 2020, and 2009.
All right. So I'm going to go just based on sheer volume and take a stab at this 09 one. Gosh. I'll say Dallas Clark because he had Peyton Manning throwing him the ball.
And the answer is correct. Well done. Wow. He had exactly 100 receptions in 2009. So the other 2 players you did not get, Zach Ertz in 2018 has the record for most receptions in a season with 116. And the other one, how about Darren Waller, who had 107 back in 2020. Mikey Riddle, you win MHA trivia. So proud of you.
Darren Waller, I always forget about him because he's hurt all the time.
He just came into my head as soon as As soon as it passed me, I was like, okay.
Yeah, Darren Waller did not get that many receptions this year, unfortunately, for myself who drafted him. So a little bitter about that, but not surprised because, yes, a lot of injuries. But those are the tight ends. Well done, Evan Ingram. Who'd have thunk it after this quiet season? He ends up with over 100. We'll see if he gets to the record. Might be tough. He does have 1 week left to go. But let's get into this championship recap. I hope Joe has some whiskey on hand there as we go through this. I'll ask you guys questions as we go along. If I'm wrong on something, just yell at me and interrupt me. But as we get into this, Butterfingers and Kilgore Trout for the championship. Todd team going for their third MHA title. Kilgore going for their second. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to ask both of you owners this question. And we know a little bit from Todd, but I'll let Todd answer in as well. But did either of you have any lineup decisions or concerns heading into week 17 that kind of was on your mind and you thought about? We'll start with Joe.
You know, I had briefly considered starting Joe Flacco over Goff. But knowing that they were playing, if they were not playing the Jets, I might have thought about it a little bit harder. But since they were playing the Jets, it wasn't that good of a matchup. Had ridden Goff all season. I just figured I'd stick with them. And it didn't make the difference. So, I mean, that made me feel a little bit better.
That is correct. For sure. I think I read something today that Joe Flacco has more touchdown passes this past month than the Steelers starting quarterback, not Rudolph, Pickett, has in his entire career. That's absolutely bonkers. I love NFL football. Todd, did you have any last minute decisions? You said you felt pretty good about your lineup going into the weekend.
Yeah, maybe the only one. Maybe I was thinking about what defense I was going to play. You know, I know Baltimore last week or in the semifinals, you know, played really tough against San Francisco. But I thought, okay, against Miami, you know, do I really want to risk it? And I thought Tampa against New Orleans, but Mikey brings it up all the time. It's, you know, it's a divisional game, and they just and when they play each other, it's, you know, whether it's a fight or both defenses are playing tough and everything. And obviously Baker had probably one of his worst games. Granted, still scored 42 points, but you know, wasn't on point as he was in previous weeks. So that was my only decision I was kind of going back and forth with. But obviously, I mean, Baltimore scored 14 points and Tampa only ended up with 1. But again, that, you know, at the end, it didn't, you know, it didn't matter.
Lucky it didn't come back to bite you is what you're going to say.
That's very true. Yes. Yeah.
Because you just never know. I mean, I think, didn't you like not play them the week before and they outscored your previous defensive team as well? I think it was like by
both
1 point, but
yeah, I think both Tampa and Baltimore, you know, scored, you know, in the double digits, and I think it was just by a point or something that that Tampa had over Baltimore. But yeah, that was my only really concern. I mean, you know, the rest of my team, you know, again, the way my roster was, I was, you know, kind of ride or die. You know, at this
and I
point
think
now,
that it says a lot. I think, you know, if you're struggling or things aren't going well, you're trying to find the best. So you may not have like the for sure starters in hand, and so you're kind of looking. You guys felt pretty good about your team, and despite matchups, whatever, you guys were rolling with pretty much the squad you went with all year for the most of the year, minus trades or whatever. And I think that's a sign of a good team that you don't have to think about it too much. All right, so we head into Saturday night. And hold on, it started all on Thursday night. Let's go back to Thursday night, that Browns-Jets game. Butterfingers rolling out the incredibly hot David Njoku, who had 57 points the previous 3 weeks combined. And he looked to put up yet another 20-point outing, catching wide open passes, picking up just chunks of yards, even scoring a touchdown for the third straight week. I'm getting texts from Joe saying, make it stop, make it stop. But a fumble and then a lack of passing opportunities because they had the game pretty much in hand. In that second half, actually held the Browns tight end in check. 10 points for Njoku to get that matchup underway. So I'm sure Joe is feeling not as terrible with just 10 points considering how it started. But to see that start, yeah, that's got to be kind of, I don't know, worrisome because Njoku had just been tearing it up this year, at least the last month or so.
It was a pretty rough first quarter. I don't think he had a touchdown, but he had like 120 yards and 5 receptions, I think.
You're correct.
Yeah,
You're correct.
And then
that
he
was like
had the fumble, and then they pretty much stopped going to him. So 10 points. I was like, well, it's overcomable. I can overcome that.
And so we would find out right away if he would overcome that, because that Saturday night game, as Todd mentioned, there was a lot at stake. That Lions-Cowboys matchup, of course, the Kilgore's Lion trio of Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jahmyr Gibbs in action. 1 week ago, we saw the three Lions pile up 92 total points between all three. So while Dallas has had one of the top defenses this year, they've been able to get to offenses have been able to get to them recently and get some big passing performances. We talked about that Geno Smith, but unfortunately not on this day for the Lions. It was a low-scoring day, a lot of long drives, a lot of points that didn't go Joe's way, like David Montgomery scoring a touchdown. In fact, Goff had something like 21 or 22 points with the game almost over, but a late touchdown drive that ended up with Goff finding St. Brown for a score put Goff up to 31 points, St. Brown up to 17. But just 5 points from that rookie sensation of Jahmyr Gibbs. So a total of 53 points. Joe, you were texting me throughout this game. It sounds like a lot of frustration. From last week where everything went right, it seemed like this weekend, not so much.
Yeah, no, just they weren't just weren't getting down the field. They weren't staying on the field. They weren't. I wanted them to go for not to go for two at the end, so they could maybe rack up some more points in overtime. But yeah, just not enough possessions. They just didn't move the ball well enough, and I think Dallas had some longer possessions, and yeah, it just didn't work out. St. Brown had a good game in the end. Gibbs did not, and I thought hopefully Dallas would be ahead in that game, and the Lions be forced to pass, which would mean a lot of Gibbs, but it was a tight game as well, so it just wasn't the right script for me.
Yeah, unfortunately. And of course, you had Ferguson, the Dallas tight end, who's been a pretty good tight end this season. Again, low scoring, a lot of passes went to CeeDee Lamb. Someone like me who had Lamb just makes me like, oh, I thought I just had him in this championship game. This would have been amazing. But unfortunately, that's not my story. And Ferguson with just 5 points. So, Todd, you see the points that the Lions trio put up, or even with Ferguson. How are you feeling once we're heading into Sunday? You feeling okay? You feel like you avoided a big kind of punch to the ribs in terms of this back and forth boxing match?
Yes, I did. I mean, I kind of like, I think I like survived a little bit. I was like, all right, cool. Goff didn't go off for 65, and Brown didn't, and obviously, I think if it wasn't for that late touchdown drive by the Lions, I think up to a certain point, I think Goff was only at 17 points, and I think Brown was like maybe around like 9 or 10 points before that drive, and I thought, okay, all right, it's again, we all know sometimes fantasy football is a little bit of, you have to have a little bit of luck, and it's lucky enough that that the Lions, didn't have one of their, usual games they've had all season long where they've scored, a lot of points, and I felt good. I was like, all right, 31 points. I mean, I don't need, I was like, I don't need, 50 or 60 from Purdy. So I felt good going into Sunday. But again, it's a lot of things can happen.
So it's 58-10. Kilgore Trout heading into the Sunday games, and the big game for the Butterfingers came in those early games. Of course, the 49ers versus Commanders. On paper, Washington is absolutely atrocious against QBs. Thus, of course, some concerns for Joe as this one got underway. But this game was kind of similar to the Cowboys-Lions game. Slow going, long drives without touchdowns. Mikey, you were there with me and Todd as we were watching these games, and Todd very quiet throughout the whole day, which is definitely not Todd-like. But what did you kind of see in that Niners and Washington game as it was kind of unfolding?
I saw a very nervous Todd after
yes.
Christian McCaffrey mysteriously left the game in the beginning of the third quarter. I mean, you were there. He saw he was pacing back and forth. He didn't want to say anything. He punched a wall.
He did. He punched a wall, Joe. Can you
For
believe
real?
this? No, it was an accident.
Well, his ceiling is very low in one part of the basement, and I didn't notice it, Joe. Like I didn't purposely do it, but I was just like, oh, and then they're like, that hurt? Like, yes, it hurt. And then it was fine. I was like, ow.
Yep.
Yes.
So that game is going along, a lot of long drives. Washington's not scoring a lot of points, but they're eating up a lot of time to, take away these Purdy completions. And it almost looked kind of similar to that previous game. Purdy did throw a late touchdown pass to Brandon Ayuk to help Purdy reach 43 points. CMC 11 points, solid day, but below average from what we're used to seeing from McCaffrey, who, as Mikey mentioned, left in the fourth quarter with a calf injury. I think that I was just thinking about that today, where McCaffrey has dealt with injuries the last few years, and luckily for Todd, he got something out of him and got hurt after the fact. So that's how you kind of know the fantasy football gods working in your favor when an injury to a guy that's been injury prone happens after it's pretty much over. So Brock Caffery finished with 53 total points. Kilgore got double-digit performances from Puka Nacua. We'll talk to Joe about some of his team here in a little bit. Of course, Bijan Robinson also reached double figures. But the difference maker of the weekend may have been Najee Harris, a guy that burned Todd 2 years ago as Todd's third overall pick in 2022. Well, he came back for redemption and racked up a season-high 21 points, 122 rush yards, 2 touchdowns. That second touchdown kind of sealed the deal, and that's when we saw and heard more than anything the screams of joy echo in Inglewood at that moment. And as the Butterfingers would come out on top, 124-101, they earned their third MHA title. Joe finishes as the runner-up for the second straight season. And so, Todd, you pick up that trophy. I don't know if screaming is the right word. I was worried about the neighbors coming over, but that second touchdown, you feel confident that was it. You still had a guy left, and Joe even said, because Joe still had a defense going. He's like, oh, Denver could score a touchdown because he still has Aaron Jones. And so I think at that point, Joe felt like it was over as well. So Todd used to get that second touchdown from Najee. You jump up, you holler in enjoyment. Must have been a good feeling.
Absolutely was. I mean, as much crap as I give Najee Harris,
Yeah, you have.
Yeah, I mean, I'll send him a fruit basket or something, or a bottle or something. But yeah, it's kind of ironic, the player that I so much crap to, he helped me win, my third championship. It's
and you
it's
traded
great
for him too.
Yeah.
That wasn't the guy you drafted. You ended up making a trade with Eaton W's at one point, and Deontay Johnson helped you at one point during this playoff run, and Najee Harris, of course, big time performance.
Yeah, it was amazing because obviously Jaylen Warren, throughout the season was taking a lot of, carries away from Harris and touchdowns especially. And, on this day when I needed him to help me win, he came through. I mean, the fact that the 2 touchdowns he got on Sunday, I mean, he was just dragging the defensive lineman across that line. I was like, yeah, let's go. And, it was pretty great. It's pretty great. Yes. But yeah, I mean, I was quiet for those morning games. And then, when things start to go right, I get a little bit louder. So it was I think you guys said, or Mikey said, I don't think we heard him. And you were like, yeah, I don't think we heard him.
Najee Harris ended up having 24 points. I think I said 21. So my mistake there. But still, it was enough to secure the win for Todd. Mikey, I don't know if you have sometimes you have interesting perspectives. I mean, Todd picking up his third championship. He enters the 3 timers club, if there's such a thing. But anything you want to say about Todd's championship?
Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable, to be honest. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's ultimate respect. Mm-hmm. I mean, his team was 1-5 at one point.
Yeah.
And to pretty much go whatever it was and 9-1 the rest of the way, it's pretty incredible.
Well, you said it, Mikey. You said I'd have to at least either go, undefeated or lose, I can only lose one game in order to kind of save my season. So, it was kind of I was like, all right, let's see what my team is really made of. I didn't, panic, because obviously week 1, Aaron Rodgers was like, oh, well, there's my season. All right, cool. That was fun. Yeah, it pretty amazing run there. I don't think. I mean, we'd have to go look back in the history books of this league of somebody starting 1-5 and winning the championship. I don't think that's ever happened, at least for as long as I've been in the league. I don't know, before 2010. I don't know if anybody before, from 09 to 2002, went 1-5 and won the championship. But
didn't you have an amazing kind of comeback last year? I don't know if you're 1-5, but you came back from kind of a dire straits situation at one point last year.
Yeah, I
You
think
recall?
last year my team was pretty middling, and then I got hot in the playoffs.
Okay.
I think the year before I was like 0-6 or something, and then like had a shot at the playoffs going into the last week, but didn't quite make it in there.
Yeah, maybe it was 2 years ago. I think you're right
Yeah.
about that. Yeah. All right, Todd, I'm going to ask you one more question,
Mhm.
and then we're going to talk to Joe about his team a little bit, just because we get him on, let's utilize him, right? But what was your move of the year? And we're going to have our awards episode next week. But is there a move, whether it was a Najee Harris trade, was it just the drafting of CMC? What, in your opinion, was your biggest move that led you to this championship?
I think it's got to be Christian McCaffrey, plain and simple. Probably, runs, catches, everything. That's what pretty much carried me. I mean, Brock Purdy, you would say, is a surprise because I drafted Brock Purdy toward the end of the draft as my
Yeah,
backup.
because I mean, you drafted Aaron Rodgers, and he was out like the first two plays, and you're
Yeah.
still able to win the championship despite losing your starting quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it just, but also too, it tells you, it shows you, you still have to draft, a good team around you. And obviously, I mean, Christian McCaffrey helps a lot. And, affection, my love affection for Aaron Jones, getting him. And then probably one of the underlying performance of one of my players is Mike Evans. Mike Evans. I mean, he's playing for a contract, and I knew, okay, he's going to want to ball out because he's going to want to get a new contract, and all he did was score touchdowns. So that's probably the underlying one because I know that pick a lot of people didn't like as much. I know you guys. You said you guys didn't say it was a horrible pick, but it's Baker. Baker doesn't throw the ball down the field so much, but he was chucking the ball down the field this season for sure. So, and they were all going to Mike Evans. So, gotta love that.
Well, congratulations, Todd, in the Three Timers Club, picking up the championship here in 2023. I'm sure we'll hear from you more as you have the right to brag until you're not the champion anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So
Butterfingers tasting good.
There you go. Todd says as a preview he's going to hand out Butterfingers for everybody to eat at the next draft. So everybody be prepared for that. If you hate Butterfingers, this should be fun.
And I should hand out Rubik's cubes too. I should hand out Rubik's cubes.
Interesting. Hopefully we don't have to finish it or complete it because I would not be able to do it. All right, let's talk to Joe about his season a little bit. As the runner-up last year, this year you were drafting 11th spot. You went Bijan in the first, St. Brown on the turn, and then Ridley and Gibbs. And that's our 4 incredibly productive players. You look back on that draft and how it kind of went through the season. Just kind of give us your thoughts as the season kind of unfolded for you.
Yeah, I remember at the draft in the first round saying, like, my choice, I felt like in the first round was Bijan Robinson and Nick Chubb. And obviously glad I picked Robinson because Chubb was done for the year by the end of week 2, I think.
Yeah.
So that would have been rough. Coming back around, this was kind of set apart by like decisions I had made in other leagues where I think I had CeeDee Lamb. By the time we drafted, I had CeeDee Lamb in about 4 leagues.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I didn't have St. Brown in any, and I was just like, yeah, I'll take St. Brown here. And then I think you took CeeDee Lamb right after me, but
I did.
Had I taken CeeDee Lamb, I don't know if that would have put me over the top, but I think I still would have been in a similar position based on how they both performed this year. And then I just decided to go all in with the rookie running backs and grab Gibbs there in the 4th round, not really liking what else was on the board all that much. But I think the most important pick I had was after the draft, when after week 1 I had waiver priority and I was able to get Puka Nacua.
Yeah, he had a stellar week one, and sometimes they flame out, right? Sometimes you get a guy that was just great. Cooper Cup was not playing; he was dealing with an injury, and but you took the swing, and boy, what a season he ended up having. I'll have to check to see where he ended up finishing, but yeah, that was a fantastic move for you as well. Something else that really worked out well for you because as you were rolling along in the early part of the season, Kirk Cousins was your starting quarterback, and he was the number one scoring quarterback in our league before going down in week 8. But you did draft Jared Goff as your backup, and he would lead you to the title game. So I think that's got to be a good feeling because I kind of did the same thing where I drafted a backup early, and Geno Smith did not pan out for me as we saw Burrow go out. But I think you lose your starting quarterback who is just destroying opponents, and you're like, I don't know your thoughts. Is you're like, well, Jared Goff's my quarter or my backup, or were you out there looking around or thinking about making trades? How did when Kirk Cousins went down? What was kind of going through your mind at that point in time?
I was just gonna kind of wait and see. I think. I mean, I had Goff. I felt okay about him. I mean, I didn't really like the idea of having a Lions heavy lineup, um, mainly for the reasons that I lost in the Super Bowls. When they have a down game, that's a third of your lineup that's going to be suffering. So kind of hard to overcome that. But there really wasn't much else out there, so I was kind of stuck with him, I guess. But he did pretty well. The Lions were a pretty consistent offense. Occasionally, they have the occasional down week, and unfortunately, and at the worst time. But he did pretty well. So it was pretty easy to stick with him. And then I kind of cycled through some backups, but never really had to play. I think I had to play Will Levis one week when Goff was on the bye or something. But yeah.
Well, I could definitely talk to you about being stuck with quarterbacks because they're not. It was a
Yeah,
weird
you
year
had
for
Burrow.
quarterbacks. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Burrow, and you're trying to. I've tried to make trades with a couple teams and it just didn't pan out. And we had this whole discussion a few weeks ago how it's tough to trade and everybody's thoughts on players are different. And so it was definitely tough to try to find them. And we had so many quarterbacks went down with injuries. Was starting quarterbacks. I think it was like 7 or 8 or something like that that went down with injuries. And at that point, you're really, really trying to grasp just anybody with great matchups at that point. So for you, Joe, you won 4 of your final 5 games in the regular season. Were you feeling really good? Because like when you got to that postseason, you wiped out the first 2 opponents. You scored 147 and then 183. So things were going pretty good for you. And a lot of that had to be was the Lions, but you must have been feeling pretty good heading into the playoffs.
I don't know. I mean, I felt like I was the underdog in every game I had. I felt like they were close matchups, but I thought like everyone I played had a good. Like I thought Allen had a good team. I know he loves those Niners, but he had Josh Allen.
Yeah.
I think his team just didn't perform for him in that week, and I ended up having a really good week. I think that was the week that the Lions blew out the Broncos, so that was a good week for me.
Yeah, for sure.
And then last week, yeah, my team just really blew up, and I think, gosh, who did I play? Chad Powers.
Correct. Yep. He scored 132, but
Yeah,
boy,
he
you
had
had
a
your
he had a
best
good
scoring.
game.
Yeah, you had
Yeah.
your best scoring output of the week or the
Yeah,
year. Excuse me.
but yeah, my team just blew up with the Lions, and I think Puka Nacua had a huge game on that Thursday night, and it was kind of off and running from there. But so I mean, obviously I felt really good after those 2 games, but yeah, I even felt like the underdog going to the Super Bowl though too with Todd's top 2 guys facing Washington and me going up against Dallas. I thought that could be. I had some matchup issues, but
So,
you never know in
yeah,
fantasy.
it is true. You just don't know in any given week and the matchups. And, you know, I know Joe I've been in fantasy baseball leagues with him. And, baseball is such a different sport than football where there's so many players and you can kind of make up for injuries and deficiencies in baseball, where football, if someone gets hurt or, obviously everybody in the world knows Christian McCaffrey is, and every defense is trying to stop him. And so you expect these big outputs, and of course CMC is so good it didn't matter that people were trying to stop him, but that's football. And so they're going to try to do everything they can to slow down your best players. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. Sometimes injuries happen, sometimes the game script changes. It's fantasy football. We could research for 24 hours a day and it still wouldn't pan out as much as we would like to. And just looking at Puka Nacua, he ended up finishing 7th amongst our wide receivers. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here as well. But anything else you want to say about this season, Joe? I know it's tough to lose in the championship. That's 2 years in a row that you've had really good seasons. But I know it's just not being able to get over the hump. That's got to be a little frustrating trying to win that second one here in the MHA.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the kudos to Todd. I mean, his team had a good week, I thought. Outside of McCaffrey going down with that injury, I think if that hadn't happened, I mean, it would have been, I think he would have had easily in the mid 130s or 140s. But, it's the second year in a row my team just has kind of fallen flat in the Super Bowl, and it sucks, but, it is what it is. I read one thing online. It's like the skill of fantasy football is putting together a good team and scoring a lot of points, and the luck of fantasy football is seeing it all pan out in the playoffs. Because you never know week to week.
This is true. This is true. This is something that I always joke with Mikey and Aaron and Todd about. But if you had to put a percentage on luck and talent, what would you think that would be? Like, how much out of 100, what would you put the talent level in terms of fantasy football and research and looking at matchups and figuring out who's going to break out years, as opposed to, well, sometimes you're unlucky and sometimes you're lucky?
I'd say it's like 65-35 skill, maybe. Because, I mean, I look at people, I think, you see a lot of the same teams in the playoffs every year. I look at Mikey's teams. Mikey always puts together good teams. I think he had the highest scoring team this year and last year. Yeah. And just, it didn't work out in the playoffs for him. But, every year he's right there. Eric, you too. Todd, you were coming off a down year, but obviously you won 3 championships. So you know what you're doing. And then, people have ups and downs, but yeah, that's what I'd say.
Well, I like it. Maybe a little high for me in the talent category or skill category, but maybe just because I'm bitter about this season.
I think so.
Maybe you have to get me in the middle of the season when I'm not focused on how bad things or how things didn't pan out, but that's okay. So here is the final standings and how the draft order is going to be for next season. So, of course, Gonzo Cat's first to worst. He'll draft number 1 next year in 2024, or this year now. The NWA will draft second, Notorious CUP, then followed by Eaton W's. Cooper's Cousins, Lemonheads at 6, Hot Tamales at 7. That chaps my eye to have sitting next to Mikey, draft right next to him. The Belt Sanders at 8, Line Rip at 9, Chad Powers Fan Club for the second straight year in the 11th spot, Kilgore Trout. And, of course, drafting 12th and 13th, the defending champs, the Butterfingers. I'm going to have to say that every time I mention Todd on this podcast now, aren't I?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
The defending great. It's going to be
well, great. We're about 38 minutes into this. I don't know if, Joe, you want to stick around with us, but we're going to go through just maybe the top 10 of each position, talk a bit, give us a couple of, we'll talk about a couple of the surprises or not surprises and just chat about some positions. You want to stick around with us for that?
Yeah, if you'll have me, sure.
Absolutely. All right, let's go. Let's start with some quarterbacks, which, of course, we talked about, a lot of injuries. But here's kind of how the top players in terms of quarterbacks finished. Anybody want to guess who finished number 1 amongst quarterbacks? Joe, I'll let you go first.
Josh Allen.
Very good. 763 points, followed by the guy I'm going through the podcast now. As we go in a couple of weeks, we'll have our what we went right or what went right, what didn't go right, what we were right about, what we were wrong about. I was definitely wrong about Dak Prescott. Second in terms of quarterback scoring in our league, followed by Jalen Hurts at number 3, Patrick Mahomes at 4, Jared Goff at 5, Jordan Love in the 6th spot, Tua in the 7th spot, 8, Lamar Jackson, Baker Mayfield made the top 10. And then, of course, Todd's quarterback finishing 10th as well. I'm going to go to 12 because usually that's like how many starting quarterbacks we have. And I would like to mention Sam Howell. Sam Howell, who had 369 completions. He's a turnover machine, but he racked up those completions, and finishing 12th was Trevor Lawrence. Joe, is there anything in that list that either surprises you or not surprising? I mean, your boy Jared Goff finished 5th amongst all quarterbacks.
I mean, I think just the parity, like just how the year played out. I mean, Josh Allen's not really a surprise at number 1. Dak is a surprise at 2. I think Mahomes being down at 4 was a surprise. I mean, I think everything just felt so close this year where it was just like, as long as you had a serviceable quarterback, you could kind of get through your weeks. And, your quarterback wasn't necessarily winning you the league this year, as opposed to the years past when like Drew Brees was out there and was just a god in this league.
Well, you look at the numbers in terms of how they finished last year. So, of course, we had a lot of injuries to quarterbacks this year. We also lost Tom Brady from last year. as well. Of course, Kirk Cousins goes down, Joe Burrow goes down, but like Aaron Rodgers obviously went down as well. But you look at Patrick Mahomes, who was the number one quarterback from a year ago. He finished with 917 points. The top quarterback in our league was Josh Allen, and he had 763. So a down year for quarterbacks. I don't know what that means. I haven't had time to think about why it's down because you have Joe Burrow last year, 828, Josh Allen, 819, Tom Brady, 813, Justin Herbert, 800. And so there are 5 quarterbacks that had 800 or more points where we had 0 this year. Mikey, does that say anything to you?
Well, I mean, injuries played a big part. I mean, you saw, Cousins, Herbert, Burrow, all 3 of those guys are guys that usually would be in that top 10 that weren't due to injury.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly why, the numbers are down. I don't really have a great answer for that. I mean, offense just in general seems like it's been a little bit down from last year.
Anybody on this list that surprises you in terms of these quarterbacks, or one that you were like, Eric, I told you about such and such? Like, I mean, I would know I was heavily down on Dak Prescott and he finished second, but I don't know. Any of these names stand out to you?
Oh, Jordan Love for sure. I mean,
Jordan Love.
he was kind of like you could see there was upside there, but like total question mark. And his season was so like, I don't know, topsy turvy. Like he was really good for a couple weeks and he was really bad. And then he was really good and then bad. And now he's good again. So yeah, I mean, that one's pretty surprising.
What about you, Todd? Anything about these quarterbacks you want to talk about?
I was going to say Jordan Love. That was one of my surprises on there because, this was really his first full season, at the helm. But yeah, Jordan Love. And maybe Baker Mayfield. Every thought, well, Baker Mayfield, we've seen in the past, he's capable of, putting up big yardage and putting up big points, but now, his first year being at the helm for Tampa and, finishing the top 10, people, I think we're a little surprised about that. I mean, as good as offense as he had around him, but still Baker Mayfield and finishing the top 10, that's pretty good.
All right, let's take a look at the running backs and see how they finished up this year. Well, no surprise, Christian McCaffrey, by far the number one running back in our scoring system, 349 points, followed by Raheem Mostert, the guy that Mikey was high on before the season even began. He had 247. Kieran Williams, 237 points. And then Travis Etienne Jr., Brees Hall, Rashad White. How about the name of Rashad White? Had a pretty good season. Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs, Alvin Kamara, and Isaiah Pacheco. We can kind of. Do we have you, Joe? I think we lost Joe. So I'm going to let Mikey go and talk. Is any of these names jump out at you or that surprise you, or is just CMC that good?
CMC is that good. A lot of these guys are, I think we were expecting Mostert, like even I wasn't expecting Mostert to finish like he did. The situation was just good. Miami was a good offense. He was going to get the majority of the carries. That was just more opportunity. Kieran Williams, I think, was a big shock because, again, you went into the season thinking Cam Akers was going to get another stab at this, and then totally didn't. So,
yeah Mostert, pretty incredible considering they even had Achan, who ended up coming in and doing pretty well as well. And then, of course, the passing offense was incredible. So to have anybody on the Dolphins panned out pretty big. I mean, I think Brees Hall was one of those guys we weren't sure how he was going to perform from last year, showed glimpses, and I think he had an injury that kind of ended his season a little premature. But he had some really big games near the end. I mean, he had a 22-point output in 14, just a 2 spot against the Dolphins in 15, but then 37 and 25. So that's really going to drive up his draft stock. I think we have Joe back with us. Going through these running backs, CMC, Mostert, Kieran Williams, ETN, Hall, Rashad White, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Jameer Gibbs, Alvin Kamara, Pacheco. Any of those guys kind of speak to you and as a surprise, or you just knew they were, or you had some idea that they would break out this year?
I think Pacheco was a big surprise. I mean, I didn't really expect much out of Kansas City running backs, but he was pretty consistent when he was healthy. Kyron Williams, obviously, I think is probably the waiver wire ad of the year. Mostert, just being in that offense, I didn't expect much out of that Miami backfield, nor if I did, thought maybe A-Chain would be the guy late, but Mostert really was consistent throughout. I think you said he was number 2, right?
Yeah.
So I
21
think
touchdowns.
outside of CMC, I think almost all of them were surprises.
Yeah, I mean, where's the guys you don't see? Where's Austin Eckler at?
Eckler, Josh Jacobs.
Yeah.
Those were the 2 big guys last year outside of McCaffrey. And
Saquon.
they weren't on the list this year.
No Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, kind of a disappointment. Of course, Dalvin Cook. Who's that?
Jonathan Taylor.
Jonathan Taylor, coached all of his stuff off the field. So interesting group there. Let's go over to the wide receivers and see how they finished up here. Of course, CeeDee Lamb, number 1 at 271, followed by number 2, Tyreek Hill. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Kilgore's guy, finished 3rd. Keenan Allen finished 4th. That was one of Mikey's guys. One of Todd's guys, Mike Evans, finishes 5th. A.J. Brown in the 6th spot. DJ Moore, that's right, Mikey. DJ Moore finished 7th overall. Another Kilgore guy, Puka Nacua, he finished 8th. Stephon Diggs, another Tamales guy, finished 9th. Jamar Chase in the 10th spot, followed by Devontae Adams and Deebo Samuel. Todd, anybody, I don't know if you want to talk about your boy DJ Moore, but who stood out to you in the wide receiver realm here in this top 12?
I mean, I don't know if it was a surprise or not, but just the way he performed and knowing,
Who's that?
He's Mike Evans.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, it was, you don't think of Mike Evans. Mike Evans is more of the touchdown guy compared to Godwin, who's more the PPR reception guy. But yeah, Mike Evans. I mean, knowing, okay, he's going from, Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield. And can Baker throw the ball down the field? Well, he proved it that he did it. He proved it about 8 or 9 times this year, throwing the ball down the field, because that's how many touchdowns that Mike Evans scored. So yeah, Mike Evans for sure. It's definitely gonna kind of raise the eyebrow next year. Like, all right, well, if it proves that Mike Evans can get those receptions, not as maybe as much as Godwin, but can still make up for it for all the touchdowns he scored. Because I think he scored, 8 or 9 he's caught 8
13
touchdowns, 13.
Yeah, 13 touchdowns this season.
So, I think that just, that shows. I mean, again, it was and you can only imagine, if they don't sign him, if Tampa doesn't sign him and he goes to a team with, probably a better quarterback than Baker Mayfield. I don't know, fellas. You got to think Mike Evans might, vault him into the maybe top, 5.
Okay, let's calm down.
He had a better quarterback last year.
Yeah, I mean, the touchdowns are a fluky stat. And he has pretty much the same stats in terms of receptions and yards from last year. And he 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20th last year. So you got to be careful. He's not the CeeDee Lambs. He's not the Tyreek Hills. He's not going to get you 100 receptions. And who knows? He could still put another 13 touchdowns up, and maybe he'll be in the top 5. So I think you got to be careful. I mean, if you want to anoint him, but he's getting older too. So I would just be careful. I would love for you to draft him early so I could pick up someone else, but that's just me.
But do you think, depending on if he goes to, if Tampa doesn't re-sign him, if he goes to like, I don't know, goes to Kansas City or goes to, or even imagine if he goes to Cincinnati or any, or even Buffalo, just throwing some teams out there. you think maybe depending on what team he goes to, the receptions would,
I don't think
pile
so
up a
because
little bit
he's
more. Or
he's he's not a big reception guy. He's had 1 year we had 96 receptions, but he's usually in the 70s, 76, 77, 74, 70, 67, 71, 74, 68. His thing is touchdowns. He's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of 10 or more. So that's where he's going to make his money. So, I mean, I don't know. I didn't think he was going to have 13 touchdowns this year, but I figured he would be around 70 receptions and 1,000 yards. But that'll be the discussion once we get closer and figure out who he's going to be drafted or traded to or signed or wherever he's going to go. Joe, any of these wide receivers stand out to you?
Well, I mean, I felt lucky to get Puka Nakua and have him
Yeah.
perform the way he did. But I think I did not expect DJ Moore to thrive in that Bears offense. And I know he was pretty boomer bust. He had some huge weeks and some down weeks, but I did not think when people drafted him, I did not think that was usually a good pick, but I was definitely wrong there.
So DJ Moore finished 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th. He had 92 receptions, 1,300 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Mike, you definitely believed, didn't you?
I did.
You're such a liar. Last year, DJ Moore finished 25th with 63 receptions, 888 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Mikey, who else stood out to you? What looking back in this list, I know your boy Stephon Diggs had a better beginning of the season than the end of the season. Or, I mean, you had Keenan Allen, too, who was thriving. I think he was number 1 in terms of wide receiver scoring until he got hurt late.
I had both wide receiver 1 and 2 before Stephon Diggs decided to tank the second half of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most of them are pretty familiar names. Like all these guys, Lamb, Hill, St. Brown, AJ Brown, Diggs, Chase, they're all the usual suspects. Puka Nakua is the one that stands out. DJ Moore, I'm happy for him, finally living up to his potential. I can't say anything bad about him.
Yeah, you can't. But we'll talk about that where we were wrong segment in a couple of weeks.
Adam Thielen being up there, even though he was,
Yeah, he could have been up there. I mean, he had 101 receptions. Holy cow! I'm just seeing that now, and I know he had an okay season because I had him in the Bicker League, but he has struggled mightily down the stretch. I think he had one double-digit point total in the last 6 weeks, but I mean, their receptions helped him out a ton. Brandon Ayuk had a really good year. Guys that like obviously Justin Jefferson was hurt this year. Devontae Smith for the Eagles was big last year, but kind of fell off a little bit. Jalen Waddle, another one of your guys, kind of didn't have the season that he had 1 season ago. But yeah, CeeDee Lamb leading the way. What a season he had. We'll quickly go through the tight ends as we're running up against the clock here. Joe, you want to guess who the number 1 tight end was this season?
Was it Sam Laporta?
Well done, sir. You get that little sound effect there. He had 174 points, 81 receptions, 9 touchdowns. Incredible. And so Travis Kelce, who had been living atop of the point standings amongst tight ends, finishes second with 164. TJ Hawkinson, who missed some time with injuries, was third. Evan Ingram, fourth. Of course, we mentioned 104 receptions. David Njoku finishes fifth, which means I win some sort of bet. I thought he could finish in the top 10. George Kittle, sixth. Cole Kmet, speaking of that Bears offense, he finished seventh. Trey McBride from Arizona finishes in the top 10. Then Jake Ferguson, Taysom Hill, and Dalton Schultz. I'll start with Mikey this time. What stands out amongst all these tight ends? Are you surprised Kelsey's not the number 1 overall guy?
Yes and no. So, like, Kelsey put up good numbers, but I don't know. Kansas City's
he
offense.
Put okay. Let's be honest. He put okay number for tight end. Yes, but what we're used to seeing, he had 5 touchdowns this year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's getting
older.
In the
first round. That's not what Kevin wanted to see, and that's why Kevin struggled partly.
I know. Kevin threw out all his Taylor Swift albums. It's all her fault.
I'd have to ask Kevin if he's a Taylor Swift fan. He's a big music junkie too, but I don't know if he's a Taylor Swift guy. Kelsey, 110 receptions last year, close to 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns. Kind of a rough season for Kelsey. Todd, your boy Njoku went crazy hot late, but is there any other tight ends you want to talk about in this mix?
No, I mean just very. I knew David Njoku, had the potential, but I didn't think he was. I mean, with Joe Flacco throwing him the football, I was like,
that's just it though, and this is going to be that same conversation I remember 2 years ago when when Mark Andrews went nuts at the end, the different quarterback. It's going to happen with Njoku. You watch when it goes back to Watson next year. Watch what happens.
I would like to think that Mark Andrews is a little better.
He is
than Njoku,
but it's the same thing.
So you think there's going to be once Watson comes back that
regression is coming?
Joe, what do you think? Tight ends this year.
I mean, it became a position that I just hated, I think. I kind of punted the position in the league. I ended up with, I think I had drafted Tyler Higbee, and then I wound up just rolling with Ferguson the rest of the way. There was never much out there. It's almost like a kicker position at this point, it felt like to me, aside from unless you had like a Laporta and even him, he was kind of boom or bust. He had 3 touchdowns one week, and then he'd have like 3 points the next week.
Yeah. You ended up drafting 3 tight ends, Joe.
Did I?
So you drafted Higbee in the 12th, and you draft Luke Musgrave in the 16th, and then Ferguson in the 17th.
Oh, well, I must have dropped one of them pretty quickly.
For sure. Yeah, what a weird position. I'm happy to say that I don't know if happy is the right word, but Kyle Pitts continues to disappoint despite all of his amazing apparent athletic ability. And he may be super athletic, but he's not working out. And obviously the quarterback situation is not there over there is not great either. But Dalton Schultz, who switched teams, fell a little bit considering what he did kind of last year. But yeah, Sam Laporta. Is he going to be the number 1 tight end next year, or is it going to be Kelsey? Quick hot take. Give me yes or no, Joe.
Is Laporta number 1, or is it Laporta or Kelsey, or just Laporta number 1, or no?
Who do you think finishes number 1? Is it Laporta or Kelsey?
Next year I'll say Kelsey. I think he comes
Mikey?
back.
I will also say Kelsey.
Todd?
Yeah, it's Kelsey.
All right. Consensus across the board. I'm just going to read these real quick in terms of kickers and defense. I know who cares, but that's the only category I got right this year was Brandon Aubrey, who finishes number 1. Then Tucker, that's Joe's guy. Elliott from the Philadelphia. Myers, Hopkins, Santos, Gay, Butker, Sanders. No one really cares too much about that, but I'm just doing it for my own purpose here. Baltimore finishes number 1. That was Todd's team. Cleveland, Chad Powers Fan Club. Dallas, 3rd. Buffalo, Miami, San Fran, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, Jets, Las Vegas. Don't even see Philadelphia in the top 25. So don't draft defenses early, folks. Don't make my mistake. I know it worked out for Mikey, who ended up with Dallas, but terrible. Philadelphia, 27th in terms of fantasy points. All right, well, there you have it. Kind of a look on the position and standings and how the players kind of finished out. We'll talk more about it in a few weeks, but next week's show, we're going to have our MHA Podcast Awards. Of course, we'll have our best move of the year, the worst move of the year, the bust of the year, and, of course, the most valuable player. And before we get out of here, Joe, who's your vote for MVP here this season?
Well, I think it has to be Christian McCaffrey. I don't think there's any.
He's yeah.
When you win a position by almost 100 points over the second-place guy, it's hard to argue that they're not the MVP.
The only thing I thought about, and I'm probably, in my heart of hearts, I kind of don't agree with it, but like you pretty much knew because Christian McCaffrey had a decent year last year that McCaffrey was going to be good this year. But like most valuable player, is it Brock Purdy, the guy drafted in the 13th round, that ended up carrying him in a position where quarterbacks were hurt, especially with his quarterback that went down? Probably not.
Like a best value player.
Yeah.
Or
That's
surprise.
Just something to think about. So the idea is Todd, myself, Mikey, do you want to say something?
No.
Okay. So Mikey, Todd, and I will go through We'll reach out to folks if they want to vote on awards and whatnot, and they can let us know who they think of as the best move, the worst, or the bust of the year. A couple of other categories, the T.Y. Hilton Award we'll talk about. And then we'll come on the show next Tuesday and talk it up and tell you who we think stood out. So, Joe Vaccarelli, thanks for coming on the show. Love having you on. Congratulations. You're having a second kid up here soon, so that's amazing to see. Congratulations on that. And wishing you the best in the offseason.
Thanks, man. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, anytime you're welcome. Come on, of course, Todd, the new champion. Congratulations, Todd.
Woo! Yeah.
Mikey, you and I will just kind of hang out and get ready for fantasy baseball, I guess.
Sounds good.
It sounds thrilled. All right, well, I'm Eric Lansing, Mikey Renault, Todd Diamond, and Joe Vaccarelli. We'll see you next time on the MHA podcast.